But coupled with all of this, it's worth thinking about one of the things that was mentioned in those slides early on, which was we've been dealing with physiology, but actually so much of what's going on in training is to do with psychology. And this is some data from Jack Ragland, really quite an old data set now, but it still holds absolutely apparent. So what they're showing is psychological measures using the perception of mood states, the POMS questionnaire, in a group of swimmers. And Jack Ragland used to work with NCAA level athletes, and really good athletes, highly competitive. So here's their mood states, their overall POMS score. Remember, the higher this score is, the more indicative of kind of a shift in mood. So mid-season, they're in the dog days of training. It's really hard. Okay, so their mood score goes up, and that's fundamentally because there'll be increased scores for things like fatigue. Their vigor score will have gone down. Their depression score's almost certainly gone up. Their tension score has gone up. By the time they get to late season and they kind of get into the back end of it, what they know is coming is they know they're coming towards a transition period. So mood is actually pretty much back down to where it was. So this is really important because it shows us that actually by monitoring mood states, that becomes a useful tool, as we'll see in subsequent sessions, but it also shows us that mood responds to training and therefore would probably almost certainly respond to a taper. And so here we can see this. You've got an 8-week training program. So we've got an 8-week training program, and then you've got a 3-week taper. So 1 day before, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, and then 9 weeks and 11 weeks represent our kind of tapering phase. So this is the perception of mood states scores. And you've got this for a tapering group, which is our white bars, and control group, which is our solid bars. And what you can see is as they go through the training, their mood scores increase. You get this increase in mood scores throughout. But then as we start to get closer into the taper, the control group, they carry on rising. But in our group, who are our tapering group, notice that their mood improves significantly. It decreases, the scores go way down, showing that kind of psychological preparedness. Remember, we talked about physiological fatigue, but there is also psychological fatigue as well. And you can also see the effect there in terms of performance. It just reiterates it. So don't just view this in isolation. This is the same group, and what you can see here is this is performance time in minutes. So not surprisingly, performance time is slower throughout training. It's not great, but suddenly performance times when they go into the taper phase, look at the effect in our taper group, whereas the control group hasn't really had that benefit. So they're getting psychological recovery, and this is almost indicative of a physiological performance-based recovery. We've attained really what we want, which is athlete preparedness. And then really one of the final things to reflect on is this, which is a paper published in 2017, and it's kind of understanding a little bit about tapering and the way it's used. And they write this: the coaches in this study indicated that an effective taper allows an athlete's confidence to grow whilst allowing them to recover through a systematic reduction in training load. So this is really important, that we may not, in some cases, actually get a physiological adaptation to the taper. Some athletes may not. You saw it in the data previously. You could see some athletes weren't showing the gains. But actually, if it's a well-constructed taper, and it's a taper where the coach is looking after the athlete, fundamentally, the one thing that none of the studies have really referred to is confidence of the athlete. The athlete is getting more confident as they get closer to competition, which is something that you really, you cannot buy. You need that. And actually, that is one of the great things of the taper, is as they kind of start to feel less fatigued, both physiologically and emotionally, confidence should start to grow.